Hello, I'm Charlotte Owenberg, editor of UN Climate Champions website Race to Zero. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Gabrielle Walker, founder and director of Valence Solutions, best-selling author, expert in climate change and the energy industry. Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for joining us today. So, 1 week into COP26, how do you think it's going so far?
Oh, it's a great question. Everybody's talking about that, and I think that we haven't moved fast enough. I'm the most impatient person in the world, and there's a lot of impatient people around me. But there's a sense of momentum here, and I think all these announcements that have been coming out, some of them predicted, some of them not predicted, and it's really a list of all the things that need to happen, one after another. Bang, that needs to happen. Bang, that needs to happen. We've been getting the announcements, and it feels like finally there's momentum behind it, and that's coming in a large part from the non-state actors, not from the governments themselves, but from the people around saying, okay, let's get on with it, let's do it. And that's actually really encouraging.
Yeah, there's absolute serious momentum, especially that exponential change that we need across key sectors.
Yeah.
But where are we not going fast enough? What could we do better at?
Yeah, so the thing that's really been worrying me for a while is that we've put a lot of focus on decarbonising electricity and on electric vehicles, and those are both hugely important things to do, and they're really bearing fruit. But in a way, I think we've forgotten a lot of the rest of the emitters, the heavy industry, the cement and steel and agriculture and some of the other big emitters. I mean, cement is responsible for 8% of global emissions, and we don't yet have a solution for it. So we really need to be focusing on those sectors and seeing what we can do to move faster.
So what is the solution? What needs to be done?
Well, I think there's a lot of solutions for that industry. What really worries me is I think we've left it too late now. We can't actually do it fast enough to get to net zero by 2050 at the latest, and we know that's what we have to do. So there's a lot of efforts to figure out how you can use things like hydrogen, how you can change the way that it's made. But one of the things that I'm now working on intensely because of this is that about last week, I think, the Energy Transition Commission brought out a report saying, if you look at how fast we need to go on heavy industry, and we look at how fast we can go at the fastest possible rate, there's still a gap. We can't now do it fast enough. We've run out of runway. And so I'm working on something that can actually go alongside those efforts to reduce emissions, which is taking carbon back out of the sky, carbon removals. And we're going to have to do, according to that report, even just to get to net zero, we're going to have to remove, between now and 2050, 220 billion, with a B, tons of CO2 from the air. And today, we're removing 1 million, 2 million. So that's an exponential curve that we need to get behind right now.
So where do we start? How do we begin to do that?
Well, there's people, when people think about carbon removals, they tend to go one of two ways. It's basically either trees or big futuristic machines, sort of green versus chrome, nature versus technology. But I think the cool thing about carbon removals is you can actually store carbon in loads of places around the Earth. So you can put it in trees, in soils, you can put it in ocean chemistry, you can put it in buildings, you can put it in rocks, you can put it deep underground, and all of those give us options for how we can do it. And if you say, which one are we going to need? The answer is absolutely all of the above, and we might just make it.
So some of these companies that are doing impressive decarbonisation roadmaps are actually maybe having activities that are preventing that removals of carbon. So how do we rectify that balance across the entire supply chain?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why people sort of don't want to think about carbon removals. And the first one that I always come across is, if we talk about removing carbon from the atmosphere, is that going to take the pressure off the need to decarbonize? So, is it kind of removals or reductions? Oh good, we have an excuse now, we can just carry on polluting and just suck it back out again. And there's quite a few reasons why I don't think that will happen, because it's very, very expensive and hard to pull the carbon back out. So it's always easier and better, much better, not to pollute in the first place. And just to be absolutely clear, we have to do that, we must do it as fast as possible. And at the same time, I think we need a target. We need a target for how fast we need to reduce, we know that. 45% reduction in emissions by 2030, but we also need a target for how much removals. And in fact, the UN High-Level Champions of Climate Action, who we're partnering with on this, have set a breakthrough target for removals. Basically today we've got maybe 2 or 3 million, and in 2030 we need 100 million. And if we do that, that's doubling the capacity every 2 years. We get on that exponential curve. That means that by 2050 we can have the billions of tons that we need. That's the plan.
So who's doing really well at this?
Not many. And because there's a couple of other reasons. People are worried about carbon removals. It's kind of, either or, and it should be both and. We have two targets, we know what we need to do. Also, we're worried in a way because it's this kind of, is it nature, is it tech, is it green, is it chrome? And the third thing is, I think there's a lack of understanding really of how much carbon removals can benefit the global south. And we've been doing a lot of work on that because in fact if we're looking at how to redress the climate justice, who's actually been doing the polluting and who's suffering from it, where does the money need to flow, this entire new industry that we're going to need, it's the polluting world that's going to have to pay for it, but it's potentially the global south that can provide the service and get the money and get the jobs and get the economic growth out of it. So we're working at the moment to see how we can actually make sure that since we're starting from scratch, not many people's doing anything very much, we have a chance to do it right, to make sure it contributes to social justice and climate equity, to make sure it brings in nature and tech and everything in between, and to make sure it goes hand in hand with reductions instead of conflicting with it. We can still do it right.
Yeah, good to know. The rate of progress amongst non-state actors is varied. Some are winning the race, some are getting there, some have barely begun. So is there excuse to not begin the race?
There's no excuse left, is there? No. There's no excuse left. We are really, it's almost too late, but we can still do it. And I think that understanding, it's mainstreamed in so many places. It's mainstreamed in the financial sector. It's mainstreamed in many of the different industries. Even the hardest to abate ones are coming out and saying, we need to play our part as well. And I think in more or less every sector, I work with businesses across all sectors. And in almost every sector now, there's at least one or two companies that are leading the way and showing how it needs to be done. In the carbon removal space, I'd say Microsoft, for example, Swiss Re, Shopify, Stripe, they're actually putting money and efforts into trying to figure out both how to scale removals and how to get quality ones, how to make sure that they really do what they say. And they're setting a standard that others are going to have to follow. And I think for the companies that are just ignoring this still, or thinking they're going to be able to get away with it, Mark Carney, when he was still governor of the Bank of England, issued a letter about this, talking about what net zero by 2050 means in 2030, in other words, in 9 years' time. And he said, of course, 45% reduction in emissions. He said that requires, and I think this is an understatement, a massive reallocation of capital. And then he said, any company or sector that fails to recognize this will fail to exist. And I think that's the message now that's starting to get through. It's basically, if you don't have a target to get to net zero by 2050, if you don't have a plan to get to 45% reductions by 2030, you're not at the table. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
And yet, we're seeing so many banks still, not members of the Race to Zero, companies that are putting short-term profits over long-term thinking. How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think in a way they've been able to get away with it, and partly there are those people out there who I think probably don't work with many of these businesses who think that there's a lot of kind of people who are trying to cling on to the old ways because they want to destroy the planet. Relatively few people wake up in the morning and think, what can I destroy today? And most people are fundamentally trying to do the right thing. But there's systems of incentives and structures that make it hard, and it's always easier to go back to the way you were doing it before. So I think what's making the difference now is it's beginning to dawn on more and more people that there's no option to stay the way it was before. So the option is to choose this path or that path, but there isn't any old way, there's only different new ways. And I think I've spoken to lots of senior execs of big global banks in the last couple of months, and all of them are doing things like looking at ways to make the cost of credit depend on your sustainability. So you've got a good sustainability record, it's cheaper to borrow money. If you've got a bad sustainability record, it's expensive to borrow money. And it's not just, I love this bit, it's not just how you're doing now, it's what's your plan? What's your transition plan to get from here to there? And I think we need to get away from saying, who are the bad guys because they're doing badly now, who are the good guys because they're doing good now, and saying, how do we get everybody on that transition path to have a plan, to test them against it, to hold their feet to the fire if they don't do it, but to reward the ones that do.
Absolutely. And I suppose part of that is a shift in mindset, a change in attitude that comes from or within the company. Is that something you're seeing more and more of?
Yes, I am. And it's coming from two interesting places that I didn't expect, maybe three places. One of them is the activist investors like Engine Number One. They bought a small share in ExxonMobil, and that gave them enough to be able to put in a resolution at the annual general meeting. Activist investors have been doing that for a long time, getting absolutely nowhere, but this time they persuaded the big guys to join them and actually replace directors on the board of ExxonMobil. It was amazing. So that's kind of working from the inside, from the shareholders. And then there's another place that it's coming from, which is investors. So while COVID hit, I was very worried. I thought that a lot of big companies who had plans to change were actually going to put that on hold. And in fact, many of them accelerated it. And I said, why are you doing that? And they said the pressure is on from the investors. Investors who've realized that they are going to experience risks, unpriced risks, that it could cost them money if they don't actually make this change. And then the third place is often from kids. So the number of senior executives I've said that are saying, we're doing this to the company, I say, why are you so passionate? And they say, it was my daughter, it was my grandson. And for years when kids have been saying, what can I do? I've been saying, make a nuisance of yourself. I didn't know it'd be quite this effective. But, you know, when you start to hear it from all sides, you can be a school governor, or you can be a chief executive, but you start to realize you've got to act, right?
Definitely, and COP26 has been so great for pushing climate on the public agenda. It feels like climate change TV 24/7, which is so welcome.
Yeah.
You mentioned that urgency and clarity were two words that were really important right now. Do you feel like those two words ring true right now?
I think there's more of a sense of urgency, but I think there's less clarity. And because everyone's in a hurry now, one of the things that I and my various teams are working on is just trying to clarify even just the language that's used around some of these things. I hear people throwing out words like carbon capture or CDR, carbon dioxide removal, or nature-based solutions, or natural climate solutions, or direct air capture. And I think there isn't really much of a sense of what's involved with any of that, and people just use them for shorthand for whatever they either like or fear. And so I think what we need to do in the clarity stakes is to try and figure out, trying to make sure we're speaking with a common language, and also to try to connect. There's the people, I mean, in carbon removals, there's this ecosystem now that's trying to make it happen. Producers, people want to buy it, people are thinking about the financing, and they're all madly going. And then there's another set of people who are kind of thinking, how does this fit into net zero? How does it fit into a climate story? And they're not really talking to each other. And then within these groups, they're not quite talking to each other. So the collaboration we're doing with the high-level champions, it's called Rethinking Removals. And what we're trying to do is just help align it all. Help align the language, help connect together the people that are trying to make it happen, help connect the people who are thinking about how it should fit, talk about those three big fault lines that I talked about, like nature versus tech, and removals versus reduction, and global south versus global north, and really try to figure out how we can give the right momentum to the right kind of removals and give no oxygen at all to the wrong ones. So we're doing an event on Tuesday in collaboration with the high-level champions, where we're going to be talking exactly about that. We've got some brilliant speakers who will be addressing how we build a future where we've figured all this out. What does it look like? Do we want to live there? And then how do we get there from here?
I look forward to that. So 1 week down, one to go. What do you want everyone to be talking about in 1 week's time? What is a good outcome for you?
I think there's going to be a few good outcomes. One of them, before I came here, I said, people were saying, is it going to be a success or is it going to be a failure? And I said, I don't think that's the right way to think about it, because we're on a journey and we need to get onto that exponential urgent curve. And already the things that I've been hearing, the sense of momentum is good. So by the end of next week, I'd like there to be a feeling of real urgency everywhere. And the other thing is a perception of the need to talk and engage and connect, and to get away, the thing that might stop us is this polarization, this I have to scream at you and you have to scream at me and we have to confront, because if we do that, we'll be lost. So everything we can do to stop and listen and think and realize that everybody has to be part of this. At the end of next week, if we're really on that path, I think we'll win.
On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Gabrielle Walker.